I actually would love to start off the conversation with a question about composition. You teach an amazing composition course, and I remember we talked when you were first designing it, and you were talking about the importance of composition and how it's actually kind of like the least flashy topic, yet it can be a super powerful topic. You know what I mean? Like a lot of flashy topics would be like color and light. Everybody wants to understand that. Character design, stuff like that. So I want to start it off by just asking you if you could elaborate on what is the importance of composition?
That's an excellent question. And you're right in the comparison you make because when we first talked about schoolism and setting up classes, I absolutely wanted to put together a color and light design class. One, because I love that topic. It's an important topic. At the same time, we wanted to get people's attention and give them something special. And the topic of color and light really intrigues people. But I knew that I had to do a composition class for exactly the reason that you were alluding to. I'm a fanatic about foundational skills, drawing, draftsmanship, and such. I'm a fanatic about how important color really is. And yet, if your draftsmanship isn't there yet, you're early in the learning curve, your color design, it's so hard and you're not quite there yet, just kind of basic. If you get an image that has a powerful composition, people will forgive imperfect drawing. They'll forgive imperfect color. They'll think you did it on purpose. They'll think you have an intentional naivete, or you're being kind of gritty, you're being rough and gritty intentionally, because that composition, it can grab people from across the room and really engage them. And so composition can be everything.
Fantastic. When we're talking about composition, though, perhaps we could talk about the things that you feel. I know there's so many important things to composition, but if you can distill it into like two or three super important things that make great compositions, what could people kind of think about? What could people kind of try?
Yeah, so the trick with composition, the really hard thing, and this is one thing I've changed up a little bit, and I've started. We do live workshops sometimes. I think people know Bobby, you and I, and the Schoolism crew, and one thing I've been adding into our discussions about composition is a checklist about problem solving, because it's so hard to deal with the complex image. Sometimes we need to fall back on simple ideas to get the foundation there. And we talk about crazy client demands and how so often we're called on to do artwork that has this thing, that thing, the other thing, the third thing, the fifth thing. And oh, by the way, the producer's wife loves peacocks. Can you put peacocks in? Just a crazy request. And you think that's ridiculous. All this stuff it's going to be a picture that's out of control. But we have to have the ability to deal with these complex pictures. And so that's the key often in composition is, how do we take all of this stuff in our images and find ways to get them to relate to each other meaningfully, so that all of that stuff comes at the audience like a one-note knockout punch, really put things together. So that's the starting point, how to get everything put together. And for our purposes here, probably the best thing to mention is the most basic principle, easy to understand but hard to put into practice. In design, I call it unity with variety. Other people in design do as well. But we've got to find a way to get all those elements to unify. And then we've got to find a way to make them visually interesting enough, with enough variation to have visual excitement. Because it's that's the foundational principle, because it's at the core of being a person. We love the comfortable four square walls of home. We love the familiar. At the same time, if we do the same thing day after day after day, we want to take a vacation. We want to go and do something different. We want a little bit of variety. And so we spend our entire lives trying to set up, the comfort of the familiar, but then changing it up enough to have a little something new, a little bit of excitement. We're all like that. Every human being on the face of the earth has those tendencies. And so it makes sense that that's what's at the core of the pictures that people tend to like. And so if you can find a way to unify what's in your picture and then put just enough spice, sprinkle enough spice on the dish, so to speak, to make it visually lush and interesting, people just will inherently feel good about it.
Now, when we are trying to bring people through a story, through your image, what should they see first? What should they see second? And really guiding their eye. I wonder if you could talk about that idea of guiding the eye, but yet you can't do it too much where it's kind of spoon-fed.
I was working on one of the Shrek movies, and uh, I had very carefully composed the complex scenes, a lot of characters, and they were all kind of focused on Shrek. And I was trying to find that balance between really guiding the eye to Shrek and and having all these other elements in there and finding that balance. And here's where our skills have to be even more versatile than what you're suggesting. The director came and looked at it and said, "Oh yeah, it's great. I like it, except that we just had a meeting, a story meeting, and instead of being in the room, now in the scene, he's going to be standing in the doorway. I know you worked really hard on this image. I know in Photoshop you have the separate layers. So I don't mean to give you extra work. Just grab Shrek and slide him over to the doorway, and then you're done." And then so that was that, and the production manager said, "Okay, so you'll get that done, in the next hour, and then we'll move on to this, this, and this." And I said, "No, I won't. He doesn't know what he just asked me to do. He just completely changed the structure of the composition, and I have to rework the entire scene. It will not feel right." And so that was something I had to beg for extra time to find those solutions without crossing that line. So here's what we talk about in my composition class. We have to have as many different ways as possible for creating contrast. That's the key, right? Everyone knows your eyes tend to look at contrast. It's unconscious. The area of greatest contrast in an image, your eyes go to that for an obvious reason. The job of our eyes and our mind is to draw as much information as possible from what we're seeing. Contrast is where the most information is. And that's why we do what we do. That's why our eyes just flick to high contrast. We want to get the information. And so the obvious go-to thing is to put light against dark, and like you're saying, to have obvious lines. And so those are very good solutions, but they're overused, they're a little bit too easy, and they're self-conscious. And I have students who will do a whole series of sketches and studies where every single time they want to point us to something, they'll put a hard light against a hard dark. It's kind of the equivalent of your sword pointing, right? And so what we do is we say, okay, you're only doing one of the three properties of vision. The properties are hue, saturation, and value. Value being light and dark, hue being, red, green, blue, yellow, orange, the name of the color, and the saturation, of course, is how pure the color is. And so we seem to have this tendency to do the obvious. And so one of the things we focus on is we look at having values nearly identical, but then getting interesting twists of temperature. You put a warm next to a cool, but have the values similar, and those colors, they vibrate. They almost literally feel like they're vibrating. It's this principle called simultaneous contrast. So we do that. We get variety of hue in there instead of always going to the obvious choice. We do texture, but sometimes we do an exercise sometimes in my classes where instead of putting texture where you want the audience to look, we put texture everywhere and then have a little bit of relief from the texture. And the eye tends to go to that spot out of curiosity because it's different than everything else. Texture actually unifies everything, and the lack of texture creates the variation. So we use hue, saturation, value, texture, edges, hard against soft, and so forth, as a foundation for interesting ways to create contrast surprising ways to create contrast. And the list just expands on and on and on from there, but we start with those foundational elements. And so that's exactly it. Don't want to be too obvious, got to find the subtle solutions so that we can treat every unique scene with the uniqueness that it deserves.
Hi, I'm Nathan Fowkes, and I'm here to introduce to you my online pictorial composition course. I've been working for the past 2 decades to learn how to powerfully connect with an audience through pictures. I'm traditionally and digitally trained, and I've had the opportunity to work for major animation studios. I've worked on projects that I'm very proud of, and I hope that you've enjoyed as well. I've also been hired as a visual consultant for game design studios to bring compelling imagery to that industry as well. And so in this class, we'll draw on that experience, and we'll also study the classics from art history. We'll take the time to carefully analyze why those images have stood through the test of time. Together, we'll create new scenes and new worlds, and carefully take a look at how we can use and apply those time-honored principles in our own work and in our own design. And in the course, I have numerous demonstrations for you recorded live so that we can go step by step through the entire design and development process of making a picture, start to finish. In this class, I'll break down for you how we've tackled pictorial composition at the studios to create compelling scenes and to create storytelling so that we can engage and delight our audience. But this class isn't just for animation or concept artists, it's for picture makers of any kind. In my career, I've also been featured as a traditional artist. So we'll draw on that tradition as well to make sure you're ready to meet any challenge, whether you're working from life, or you're working in the studio, or you're working in-house for a design company. We're going to get you good at this. So we'll cover a lot of ground during our 9 weeks together, and I'm looking forward to working with you personally. Each week, I'll give you critiques and do paint-overs of your assignments so that you have the feedback that you need to reach a professional level of artistic ability. Enrollment is limited, so sign up today, and I will see you soon.